Big Shaq was calmly answering questions on live TV when the host smirked and pointed at his cross necklace. What's with that? Some kind of fashion statement? The audience chuckled, expecting Shaq to laugh it off. But instead of backing down, Shaq's expression changed. He leaned forward, gripped his cross, and smiled. What he said next didn't just shut down the laughter, it made the entire studio go silent. Within hours, the clip exploded across the internet. Millions watched in disbelief. Sponsors panicked. Careers were destroyed. And Shaq? He walked away more powerful than ever. But here's the twist. This wasn't just about a necklace. Stay till the end, because what happened next will leave you shocked. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The bright studio lights blazed down as the cameras rolled, broadcasting live to millions of viewers across the country. The atmosphere was light, casual, just another episode of the debate room where controversial takes were the norm. At the center of it all sat Elliot Graves, the show's sharp-tongued host, known for his smug demeanor and habit of pushing boundaries. Seated across from him, relaxed but commanding attention without trying, was Big Shaq. The conversation had started off harmless: basketball, business, and Shaq's latest charity ventures. But then, Elliot's eyes flickered toward Shaq's chest. A thick, silver cross necklace gleamed under the studio lights. It rested against Shaq's broad chest, bold and unshaken, just like the man wearing it. Elliot smirked, leaning forward as if he had just found his next punchline. "So, Shaq," he said, his voice laced with mockery, "what's with the cross? You think that thing gives you special powers or something?" A few members of the studio audience chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably. Shaq didn't react. Not right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying Elliot as if he were trying to decide whether the man across from him was ignorant or just plain foolish. Elliot, mistaking Shaq's silence for hesitation, pushed further. "I mean, come on," he continued, chuckling as he gestured toward the necklace. "I thought you were all about power and dominance. Didn't peg you as the praying for strength type." The chuckles from the audience grew louder. But Shaq? He still didn't laugh. He didn't flinch, didn't roll his eyes, didn't even blink. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his massive hands resting on the table in front of him. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier. The laughter started dying down. People began to sense it, a shift. Finally, Shaq leaned forward. His massive frame seemed even larger as he rested his elbows on the table, his hands slowly reaching up to grip the cross. His fingers wrapped around it, the metal cool against his skin. When he spoke, his voice was calm, deep, unshaken. "You can talk about me all you want," he said, his gaze locked onto Elliot's. "But you might want to be careful when you talk about him." Dead. Silence. Elliot's smirk vanished. Shaq finally leans forward, gripping his cross, and his next words leave the entire studio dead silent. The laughter that had filled the studio just moments ago vanished. The air was different now, heavier, charged. Big Shaq, still gripping his silver cross, sat unmoved, his deep-set eyes locked onto Elliot, who, despite his usual arrogance, shifted slightly in his chair. The smirk on his face wasn't gone yet, but something in his body language showed he wasn't as comfortable as before. Then Shaq did something unexpected. He smirked, just slightly. Then finally he spoke. "Elliot," his voice was low, controlled, and full of quiet power, "you can talk about me all you want, but you might want to be careful when you talk about him." A wave of silence rolled over the audience. The tension hung thick in the air. Elliot blinked. His confidence wavered for just a fraction of a second. But then, desperate to regain control, he rolled his eyes and forced a chuckle. "Oh, please," Elliot scoffed, shaking his head. "You're really that sensitive about a piece of jewelry?" Shaq lifted the cross slightly, letting it glint under the studio lights. The reflection shimmered across his fingertips, but his face remained unreadable. His voice was calm, but his words cut like steel. "You really think this is just jewelry?" A few audience members leaned forward. Something was happening. The entire energy in the room had shifted. Elliot let out another forced laugh, though this time it didn't land. His usual charm wasn't working. He glanced toward the producers behind the cameras, as if silently asking, "Why isn't anyone laughing?" But there was nothing but silence. Still, Elliot wasn't backing down. He straightened in his chair, trying to push back. "What, does that thing give you superpowers or something?" he sneered, forcing his bravado back into his voice. Shaq's smirk vanished. For the first time in he leaned in closer. His eyes darkened slightly, his massive presence becoming even more intimidating. His next words were chilling. "You're about to find out." A frantic whisper crackled through Elliot's earpiece. The producer's voice, sharp and panicked. "Cut to commercial. Now!" But it was too late. The show producer's frantic whispers come through the host's earpiece. "Cut to commercial. Now!" But it's too late. The studio was dead silent. The tension was so thick you could almost hear the electricity buzzing in the air. Shaq sat there, completely unfazed, his massive frame relaxed, but his presence commanding the room. Across from him, Elliot was shifting in his chair, his usual cocky smirk wavering. The panicked whisper in his earpiece had told him to cut to commercial, but Shaq wasn't done. Before the producers could pull the plug, Shaq leaned forward, locking eyes with Elliot. "I've played in front of millions. I've heard trash talk from the best, but I've never seen a man so desperate for attention that he has to insult faith to feel important." Gasps rippled through the audience. Elliot's smirk vanished. His fingers clenched against the desk, his mind scrambling to come up with a recovery. This was his show. He was supposed to be in control. He let out a weak chuckle, forcing a smirk. "Oh, come on, Shaq. Let's not turn this into some big dramatic moment. It was just a joke." Shaq didn't blink. He just tilted his head slightly, studying Elliot like he was some kind of science experiment gone wrong. Then he lifted his cross again, letting it catch the light. "Faith isn't weakness. And wearing this?" Shaq's voice was steady, calm, but filled with something dangerous, undeniable truth. "It doesn't make me less of a man, but it sure is exposing who you really are." The air felt heavier. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They weren't even moving. Even the camera operators, the crew, everyone in the studio, they were all locked in place, waiting to see what would happen next. Elliot shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie. I don't know what you're implying, but..." Shaq didn't let him finish. "I'm not implying anything," Shaq interrupted, his voice smooth cutting. "I'm saying it outright." Elliot opened his mouth, but no words came out. The audience had turned. They weren't on his side anymore. Someone in the crowd murmured something under their breath. Another person shook their head. Backstage, a producer was gesturing wildly. "Shut it down. Shut it down." A camera light flickered red. And then, the screen cut to commercial. Elliot yanks off his earpiece, slamming his fist on the desk. He knows he's in big trouble now. The moment the show cut to commercial, the real storm began brewing. Not inside the studio, but across the entire internet. At first, it started as a few clips surfacing online, shared by viewers who had been watching the broadcast live. But within minutes, the video had spread like wildfire. Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok were flooded with posts, all dissecting the moment that had just unfolded on national television. The headline dominating every trending topic read, "TV host tries to embarrass Shaq, gets humiliated instead." View counts skyrocketed at a pace that even veteran media experts found shocking. The video had millions of views within the first hour, and by the time major news outlets picked up the story, it had already become the #1 trending topic worldwide. But the internet wasn't just sharing the clip. It was tearing Elliot apart. Social media users wasted no time turning the moment into a cultural phenomenon. The first viral meme showed a split screen of Elliot's smug expression before the interview, and his stunned, speechless face after Shaq's response. The caption read, "When you play stupid games and win stupid prizes." Another meme circulating thousands of times had Shaq edited to look like a towering shadow over a miniature, terrified Elliot. The words beneath it were the same ones Shaq had spoken. "Faith isn't weakness, but it sure is exposing who you really are." As the memes flooded social media, so did the criticism. People were calling out Elliot for his arrogance, his mockery, and his complete failure to handle the situation professionally. And then, the celebrities started weighing in. Public figures weigh in. Within hours, some of the biggest names in entertainment, sports, and journalism had spoken out. Dwayne Wade, NBA legend, tweeted, "Mocking someone's faith for clout? That's low." Shaq handled it like a king. Academy Award-winning actress Viola Davis reposted the clip, adding, "That silence after Shaq spoke? That was the sound of a career ending in real time." Even journalists who typically stood by their colleagues were distancing themselves from Elliot. One well-respected anchor tweeted, "There's a difference between asking tough questions and just being disrespectful." This wasn't journalism, this was ego. But while social media was tearing Elliot apart for free, there was one group that wasn't laughing: his sponsors. Inside the television studio, Elliot had just returned to his dressing room, still holding on to the hope that this was just a temporary PR nightmare that would pass in a day or two. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the internet's reaction, his expression slowly darkening. The door to his dressing room swung open suddenly, and his assistant rushed in, her face pale with panic. "The station wants a meeting." Now Elliot barely glanced up, still scrolling. He forced a smirk, shrugging as if he wasn't concerned. "It's just online outrage," he said dismissively. "It'll blow over." His assistant hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Her voice was quieter this time, but the urgency was still there. "I don't think you understand. We just lost 2 major advertisers." That got his attention. The smirk vanished instantly. His phone buzzed in his hand, and when he glanced down at the screen, his stomach twisted. It was an email from the network. He opened it quickly, his eyes scanning the words. One sentence stood out, clear and final. "Termination review in progress." His grip on the phone tightened. His chest felt heavy. For the first time, Elliot felt it. The cold, sinking realization that his career was hanging by a thread. Elliot's face drains of color. His entire career is on the verge of collapse. The chaos surrounding Elliot's downfall had reached its peak. Every major news outlet, every social media feed, every late-night talk show was covering the scandal. The internet had picked its side, and Shaq had become an even bigger legend overnight. But through all of it, Shaq himself, he stayed silent, until now. The moment he stepped out of a black SUV in front of a charity event, journalists swarmed him like bees to honey. Microphones were shoved toward his face, cameras flashed from every angle, and voices overlapped as reporters shouted their questions. "Shaq, any comment on Elliot Graves being dropped by his sponsors? Do you feel vindicated after what happened? Would you accept an apology from him?" Everyone expected him to go off, to take this moment to bury Elliot even deeper. But instead, Shaq simply raised a hand, signaling for silence. The crowd instantly hushed. He took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm as he finally spoke. "Look, I don't need to destroy anyone. The truth already did that." A stunned silence followed. Reporters blinked, caught off guard. They had expected anger, maybe even a little satisfaction, but Shaq was collected, dignified. A journalist near the front adjusted her mic. "So, you don't think he deserves what's happening to him?" Shaq's expression didn't change. "We all make mistakes," he said smoothly. "But respect? That's a choice." That line hit hard. The reporters exchanged glances. The cameras zoomed in closer. Shaq had just done the one thing Elliot never expected. He didn't need to take revenge. He didn't need to fight back, because the world had already done it for him. The internet exploded again, but this time in praise. Tweets flooded in. "Shaq handled this with more class than I thought was humanly possible." Elliot mocked a man's faith. Shaq responded with wisdom. This is what a true leader looks like. No need for revenge when the truth speaks for itself. Shaq just won in every way. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, things weren't looking good for the network. Late that night, a group of executives sat in a tense boardroom meeting, scrolling through the wreckage of their brand's reputation. Their biggest star had become their biggest liability, and now they had to make a decision. The network executives hold a late-night emergency meeting, and Shaq is about to get the last laugh. The boardroom was tense, filled with murmurs and the low hum of phone notifications going off in rapid succession. The executives of the network, all seated around a long glass conference table, were watching their empire crumble in real time. Screens on the walls displayed live social media updates, headlines from major news outlets, and one devastating email after another from sponsors pulling their funding. The CEO, an older man in a crisp navy blue suit, rubbed his temples before looking up at the rest of the room. His voice was sharp, cutting through the noise. "Let's be honest, Graves is toxic now." No one disagreed. A younger executive flipped through a stack of reports, his voice urgent. "Our audience retention has dropped by nearly 40% since the controversy, and that's just in the last 24 hours. Another chimed in. "Advertisers are jumping ship. If we don't act now, We'll lose millions by the end of the quarter. The CEO's gaze landed on the head of programming, a no-nonsense woman who had remained stone-faced through the entire discussion. "What's the damage?" he asked. She sighed, pushing a printed report across the table. "Sponsors don't want their brands associated with him, and even if we could recover from that, the audience doesn't trust him anymore." Silence settled over the table. Everyone knew what needed to be done. One final vote. The CEO took a deep breath before saying the words that would change everything. Effective immediately, Elliot Graves is no longer the host of the debate room. The breaking news that shook the internet. Later that night, at exactly 9 p.m., the network's official Twitter account posted a single statement. "Elliot Graves has officially been let go from his position as host of the debate room. We stand for professionalism, respect, and the highest standards of journalism." Within seconds, the post went viral. The internet's reaction Twitter exploded. "Yours Elliot is over" party began trending worldwide. Fans flooded the comments with celebratory memes, gifs, and jokes. One popular post showed a screenshot of Elliot's shocked expression from the interview captioned, "When you realize you were the weakest debate of your own show." Meanwhile, Shaq fans were ecstatic. Shaq never had to raise his voice. He just let the truth do the work. Imagine losing your entire career just because you wanted to mock a man's faith. Couldn't be me. Elliot's last moments at the network. Back in his office, Elliot sat frozen at his desk, staring at the screen. The breaking news alert was still glowing on his phone. The reality of the situation settled in. He wasn't on temporary leave. He wasn't getting a slap on the wrist. He was done. His assistant stood by the door, hesitant. "Sir, they need your office cleared out by the end of the night." Elliot let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head as he ran a hand through his hair. Unbelievable. With a sigh, he reached for a cardboard box and began packing his things. But as he dropped a framed photo of himself onto the pile, his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a news alert. It was a private message from Shaq. But Shaq's not done yet. He has one final surprise. Elliot sat in his nearly empty office, staring at the breaking news alert still glowing on his phone. His career, his reputation, everything he had built was gone. But just as he was about to power off his phone, another notification popped up. This time, it wasn't a news article. It was a private message from Shaq. Elliot's brow furrowed as he hesitated, then tapped the message open. It was short, "Director," and it made his stomach drop. "You might want to watch the news." His pulse quickened. Fumbling, he grabbed the remote and switched on the nearest TV. The moment the screen flickered on, his heart nearly stopped. A panel of network executives was holding a press conference. At the podium stood the CEO, the same man who had just signed off on Elliot's firing. "After careful deliberation, we are excited to announce a new era for the debate room." Elliot leaned forward, gripping the edge of his desk. No way." The CEO cleared his throat. "We have selected a new primary host, someone with intelligence, integrity, and the respect of millions." Then with a slight grin, he gestured off camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shaquille O'Neal." The room erupted in applause. Elliot's jaw clenched. His eyes widened in disbelief as Shaq stepped onto the stage. He wasn't just replacing Elliot, he was taking over. And then came the final blow. Shaq took the mic, smiled at the crowd, and dropped the bombshell. "Actually, I'll do you one better. I'm not just hosting. I just became a majority shareholder in the company." Elliot's breath hitched. Shaq smirked. "I don't just want a seat at the table. I want to own the table." The crowd went insane. The world can't believe what just happened, and neither can Elliot. Elliot sat in the dimly lit dressing room of a rival network, gripping the armrests of his chair. His career was hanging by a thread, and this was his last shot to take back control of the narrative. The network had framed the interview as his side of the story, an opportunity to expose the injustice of what had happened. But deep down, Elliot knew the truth. This was about survival. His reputation had tanked overnight. His show was gone. His sponsors had vanished, and now, his former seat at the table belonged to Shaq. That thought alone boiled his blood. As the producer signaled for the countdown, Elliot straightened his tie and forced a smirk onto his face. 3, 2, 1, live. The camera zoomed in as the anchor, a seasoned journalist named Diane Russell, turned to him with a professional yet unreadable expression. "Elliot Graves, thank you for being here." "Of course," Elliot said smoothly, lacing his fingers together. "I think it's important that people hear the truth. Diane gave a small nod before glancing at her notes. So let's start with that. What do you think happened? Elliot sighed dramatically. Honestly, I was the victim of cancel culture. The words were carefully chosen, designed to ignite sympathy from viewers. He sat back, shaking his head. People are too sensitive these days. It was just a joke. And suddenly my entire career is over? For the first time in days, he felt like he had control again. But Diane wasn't playing along. She lifted a single eyebrow. So mocking someone's faith on national television is just a joke to you? Elliot's smirk faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. Look, comedians joke about religion all the time. Why am I the one being crucified? The audience wasn't buying it. Live comments started flooding the screen. He's not sorry. He's just mad he got caught. This isn't cancel culture. It's consequences. You made your bed, now lie in it. Diane leaned forward slightly, flipping through her notes. And then came the knockout question. Tell me, Elliot, would you mock someone's cultural background the same way? The air shifted. Elliot blinked, suddenly uncomfortable. He knew exactly what she was implying. If he said no, he'd be admitting to double standards. If he said yes, he'd be digging his own grave. Sweat gathered at his brow. The silence stretched too long. Finally, he scoffed. You're twisting my words. This is a hit piece. His voice had risen, too defensive, too aggressive. Diane simply tilted her head, unfazed. The chat exploded. Oh, he's spiraling. She got him with one question. Man just self-destructed on live TV. Elliot's face twisted in frustration. His PR team had told him to back down, to be humble. But his ego wouldn't allow it. With a sharp tug, he ripped off his mic, tossed it onto the desk, and stormed off the set. The internet explodes again, and this time, it's the final nail in Elliot's coffin. The anticipation was unlike anything the network had ever seen. For days, billboards, commercials, and social media teasers had hyped up the debut of the debate room's new era. And now, the moment had arrived. As the clock struck 0, millions of viewers around the world held their breath. The screen faded from black. Then Shaq appeared. Dressed in a tailored black suit, seated in the center of the grand studio, he didn't need gimmicks, flashy intros, or dramatic music. Instead, he simply looked into the camera, his deep voice cutting through the silence. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. For a full second, there was silence. Then, the studio erupted into applause. The energy was electric, a historic night in television. The viewership numbers climbed faster than anyone predicted. Within the first 10 minutes, the broadcast had surpassed the ratings of Elliot's final episode. By the halfway mark, it was breaking network records. Social media was on fire. Shaq, the GOAT, best host ever. The real debate starts now. A viral tweet summed it up best. He turned an insult into an empire. Celebrities, athletes, and journalists all chimed in. LeBron James tweeted, "A man of integrity takes the W, proud of you, Shaq." Even brands jumped in. Nike posted, "We stand with those who lead by example." Congrats to Shaq on his first episode. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit apartment across town, Elliot Graves sat motionless on his couch, staring at the screen. His phone, once overflowing with calls, deals, and opportunities, was now completely silent. The network that once revolved around him, now it was Shaq's. His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't reach for his phone, because for the first time there was no one left to call. The ratings are so high that Shaq officially becomes the face of the network. Elliot Graves had once been a household name. Now, he was a ghost. While Shaq's show continued to dominate the airwaves, drawing in millions of viewers per night, Elliot sat alone in a dimly lit home studio, desperately trying to claw his way back into relevance. He had convinced himself that people just needed time, that eventually they'd come crawling back, begging for his unfiltered takes in hard-hitting debates. So he launched a podcast. It was supposed to be his big comeback, his chance to tell his side of the story without network interference. He even called it Uncanceled with Elliot Graves, a title he thought was clever, rebellious. The reality, no one cared. The first episode barely scraped together 5,000 views. The next, less than 1,000. By the third episode, he refreshed the analytics page in disbelief. 50 views. 50. The number stared back at him, mocking him. The live chat was even worse. Bro, just give up. LMAO, not even bots are watching this. Imagine ruining your career for nothing. Elliot slammed his laptop shut, his hands trembling. This couldn't be happening. He had built an empire. But as he reached for his phone, hoping for a text, a call, anything, he realized something chilling. There was nothing. No missed calls from producers. No emails from sponsors. Not even a courtesy check-in from his former colleagues. He had been completely erased. Meanwhile, Shaq's show continued to soar. His episodes were breaking records. His interviews were making headlines, and his name was synonymous with integrity and strength. Elliot's downfall hadn't just been swift. It had been permanent. As he sank back into his chair, his mind raced through excuses, explanations, blame. But in the pit of his stomach, he felt the cold, undeniable truth. He had done this to himself. With his reputation in ruins, Elliot finally realizes the truth. He did this to himself. The energy in the studio was still electric. Shaq's show had not only shattered records, but had sparked a global conversation about respect, integrity, and faith. But for Shaq, it wasn't about the numbers. It was about the impact. As the cameras powered down and the crew began wrapping up for the night, a young boy, no older than 10, hesitantly stepped forward from the audience section. Shaq noticed him immediately. The boy clutched a small silver cross necklace in his hand, holding it like it was something fragile, something important. His voice was small but steady. "Because of you, I'm not afraid to wear my cross anymore." The room fell silent. Even the crew, mid-pack up, stopped to listen. Shaq looked down at the boy, his massive frame towering over him. Yet his expression was nothing but warm. He kneeled slightly to meet him at eye level. Gently, he placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Never be ashamed of what you believe in," Shaq said. "The world will always have something to say, but what matters is knowing who you are." A slow murmur spread through the crowd. People whispered to each other, some even wiping their eyes. A crew member, realizing the significance of the moment, snapped a quick picture. By the time Shaq had shaken the boy's hand and sent him back to his family, that single photo had already hit the internet. And just like that, another firestorm erupted, this time in the best way possible. A moment bigger than TV, Shaq inspires. Show faith over fear. Shurana, respect wins. The image of Shaq with the boy went instantly viral. Fans and celebrities alike praised him, not just for standing his ground, but for using his platform to uplift others. Shaq isn't just an athlete, a celebrity, or a businessman. He's a symbol of strength and dignity. News outlets began calling it the moment that changed everything. But as the world celebrated Shaq's victory, he wasn't done yet. As he turned to leave the studio, he stopped suddenly. Then with a slight grin, he pulled out his phone and made one last call. But before he leaves, Shaq makes one last move that leaves the world stunned. The world had seen many viral moments, but this was different. This wasn't just a television event. It was a cultural shift. Shaq stood at the center of the studio, the stage lights casting a golden glow over him. His cross necklace gleamed under the spotlight, a symbol that had once been mocked, but now stood as a sign of something much greater. Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled to capture the moment, and social media erupted in celebration. Shaq the legend. Sharna, respect over hate. Shar, faith wins. Every major news outlet had the same headline. Shaq changed the game. It wasn't just about his victory over Elliot. It was about what he represented. A man who stood tall in the face of mockery. A man who never lowered himself to hate. A man who turned an insult into inspiration. Meanwhile, Elliot Graves was nowhere to be found. Once, his name had dominated the media. Now, he was erased. No trending hashtags, no interviews, no invitations, just silence. His desperate attempts to stay relevant had failed. No one wanted to hear from him anymore. And as Shaq's influence continued to rise, Elliot faded into nothing. Shaq's final words to the world. As the show wrapped, Shaq took one last look at the audience. A quiet smile formed on his face as he gripped his cross, then spoke into the mic. One joke ruined a man's life. One act of respect changed millions. The world watched, listened, and never forgot. Shaq didn't just win, he became legendary.